One of the things I learned really 1971 and then repeatedly is that surprises that happen in my lifetime happened to me. Many cases were for things that didn't happen in my lifetime but happened in prior lifetimes, such as in 1971, I was clerking on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. August 15th, Nixon severs the relationship between gold and the dollar, so essentially defaulting. And I walked on the stock exchange. I said financial crisis, and I would expect it to be down a lot. It was up a lot. I studied history and found that the exact same thing happened in March 5th, 1933, with Roosevelt doing the same thing basically on the radio. And then I understood things better. So what happened for me over the last number of years is there are three big things that are happening in my lifetime that didn't happen. And I actually found that with research five. So the first is the amount of debt creation and monetization of that and how it's carried through the system. The second is the amount of internal political, social, economic conflict that is now going on. And the third is the rising of a great power to challenge the existing world order and the existing world power of China, and the geopolitical in which, when I was born in 1949, and 4 years after the New World Order began in 45, and the United States, of course, was a much more dominant country then, had 80% of the world's gold, 50% of the world's economy, the monopoly on military power because of nuclear and all of that. And it's declined on a relative basis. And that led me to do research, which I needed to do the last 500 years of research to follow. I wanted to study the rise and decline of currencies, reserve currencies, and their empires. And I went back. And in doing that, I also discovered that their acts of nature actually had bigger effects than the first three of those, even with the wars, because of droughts, floods, and pandemics. These things come across about once in a lifetime, and the problem with most people is if they didn't experience it, they don't understand it. I think it creates this environment. I would recommend to anybody who's interested, I put it on LinkedIn, my study of what's called The Changing World Order, and it goes back and it shows the patterns of there, because it's like if you were in the 20s, you're experiencing the 1920s and so on, and you cannot imagine what's ahead because it hadn't happened in your lifetime. The New World Order. So we're in a spot of the cycle. It's not just about interest rates. It's about the whole enchilada, and that could be financial, which has to do with taxes, and then trying to escape taxes, and then trying to control, and all of that dynamic. And then it has to do with conflicts between the left and the right and the capitalists and the socialists, and how they can be with each other. That affects the environment. And then it has to do with the changing world order in terms of China and the United States and so on.
So if you look at the economy right now, for the shorter term where we have a situation where we don't have too much inflation and too little inflation, and we don't have too much growth and too little growth, and we don't have a debt bubble and so on. We have something that is reasonable in terms of those types of conditions. This is very different than 2008. I think the period that we're in reminds me very much of 1937, if I was to pick an analogous period of time, because at that time, it was after the financial crisis. We had 29 to 32, which is the equivalent of our 2008, 2009. They printed a lot of money, asset prices went up, interest rates went to zero, and we had a large wealth gap which created populism, analogous. The central bank begins to tighten monetary policy, and then we had a populism, and we had a fall in the stock market, and we had conflict.